This is a joint session of the Select Board and School Committee, along with the ad hoc subcommittee of the Advisory Committee, who's charged with giving us advice. So I guess that's what the Advisory Committee does. Sage Counsel, yes. So the goal tonight is a kind of a midpoint check-in with the boards and the public. There's been a lot of activity going on. A lot of it has been, gearing up and getting going. But this is going to be the first time most of us up here are seeing some of the first work products and some of the options that are starting to be fleshed out. So the goal tonight is to get an overview of those options and start putting the first pass of numbers on them. And I suspect, but I don't know, but I suspect some of these options that are out there are going to be coming off the table pretty quickly. And I just want to talk a little about the schedule going forward. So the next time we're meeting is this Monday. So tonight we're just going to be seeing the presentation. We'll take questions from the board, but I don't foresee public comment tonight. We'll be putting this up on the web either tonight or tomorrow morning. And Monday is going to be your turn to have a discussion with us, and we'll be taking public comment at a public hearing, and that's this Monday at 7 p.m. at the high school. And then on Tuesday, the 13th, so that's the 12th, the 13th is the budget presentation to the Select Board, and then a presentation from the Override Study Committee. That doesn't directly pertain to the ninth school, but I thought it would be good to get this out there. And then next Thursday, the school committee is going to be taking this up and having a discussion and a potential vote on taking some options perhaps off the table, making a recommendation on that. And then Tuesday the 20th, the Select Board is going to have a similar discussion at the Select Board's meeting. And the reason we're not meeting together is it's just one of logistics. We just couldn't get quorums of both boards in the same room. So don't read anything into it beyond just logistics. And then the next meeting after that will be, then we have some high school stuff coming up. Monday, February 26th, the high school building committee is going to be having a public hearing on the high school expansion. And there was an exciting meeting last night, I hear, which included a full-scale model, 3D model, of the high school and the surrounding neighborhood. It was quite dramatic, and a lot of people are excited about that project. And then Tuesday the 27th, there's going to be a joint meeting of the Select Board, the school committee, and the building committee to vote on a budget, and that will be the vote to put the high school on the ballot. So that's going to be an important meeting. And on that same night, there's going to be a public hearing on the recommendations of the Override Study Committee. So there's going to be a lot going on the 27th. And then on March 6th, there's going to be a discussion. And did I say 27th we're having a public hearing on the overrides? Okay, I said that. And then March 6th will be a discussion and possible vote on the override. and with a fallback date to vote on March 13th. And March 13th is actually the deadline to make a decision and put an override on the ballot. So that's kind of the drop dead from our perspective. Going forward beyond that, there's going to be additional meetings and public hearings on the ninth school study, the dates of which have not yet been set. The goal is to make decisions by the end of March. We'll see if we make that. We're moving very quickly. Also, in future meetings, we'll be talking about non-owned sites that we've been thinking about, some of which we'll be talking about it as much as we can, because some of which is concerns communications with private landowners, but we'll see how that goes. So, with that said, let me turn it over to Dr. Connolly, who's our project manager for the ninth school alternate study.
Thank you, Neil. You just covered my opening comments.
There you go.
It's made it very easy for me. So instead of going over what you just said, let me just finish before I give you a quick overview. Two things, very, very important. I want to thank the many, many Brookline citizens that have reached out to us to offer their advice and valuable insight. As you will see from HMFH's work, clearly their work tonight clearly reflects much of what we have heard from you, the community. So we thank you for being involved and being part of this process. Again, you've seen this slide many times. It's just, as Neil said, this is a four-month phase one study. Started in December, we hope to be finished by the end of March. The goal of the phase one is to identify a preferred sites to move on to phase two, which is the feasibility design, which would take place from April to perhaps July. So that's our overall goal of this study that was funded and approved at the special town meeting back in November. From the very beginning, we have encouraged people to get involved. We wanted people to feel this was a transparent, open process. We've had 6 well-attended listening sessions. We've had 4 bi-weekly updates for the Board of Selectmen and the school committee. I've had a chance to meet with many, many small groups of people, town meeting members, and neighborhood groups, and your input has been very, very well received and helpful. Thank you very much. In keeping with that, as Neil mentioned, we're going to repeat this presentation next Monday at the high school auditorium at 7 o'clock to give the townspeople a chance to weigh in and comment and ask questions about the evaluation process to date by HMFH. So what you're going to hear tonight is a presentation from HMFH on the 5 schools they were charged to evaluate, to see if these 5 schools could help us solve these school capacity space concerns we have. You can see that Heath, Driscoll, and Lincoln, the partial site solutions will involve maybe minor expansion, going from a 3-section to a 4-section school with renovation. But the Baker and Pierce, those are comprehensive sites that are being looked at for a number of ways. 4-section, 5-section, 2-3-section, a 4-3, a number of options have been considered, and you'll hear tonight what the findings have been to date. Keep in mind, this is a halfway point. We have 2 months to go. We felt it was very, very important to share with the select board and school committee what our findings are to date, with the hope that they'll be able to identify which sites, which options make the most sense to continue to move forward on. So hopefully the final 2 months of the project, HMFH will have fewer sites to evaluate and work on so they can really maximize their time and energy and resources. So with that quick overview, I turn it over to Pip Lewis, who's the principal architect at HMFH. Pip.
Thank you, Joe.
Just be sure to speak into the mic.
Okay, thank you, Joe. It's very good to be here before this body. And It has been so far a very sort of fast-paced study that we've been doing and will continue to be so, I'm sure. We have a lot of material to cover, and I don't want it to drag too long, so I'm going to sort of go quickly through it. These things will be posted online so that people can digest it in as great detail and be ready for the Monday public hearing. I will take a moment just to point out the two other team members of mine that are here. There's Chin Lin and Alicia Crothers, both sort of helped me to put this together. So we look at the sites that have been identified for us. There's Driscoll, Heath, the New Lincoln School, Pierce Baker at Baldwin North and Pine Manor. I want to point out that Baldwin North and Pine Manor are not really a part of this presentation. We're going to those will be addressed at a later date. And first, I will look at these three schools: the Driscoll, the Heath, and the Lincoln, and then we'll go into Pierce and Baker, which are each more involved sort of series of options. And as I get to the end of each section of this, you'll see that we're making a series of recommended options, and we understand that we're only at the halfway point, and there's been no conclusion, and it's not our work that will determine which options get looked at further, but I'm going to give you some insight into our professional sort of opinion as we look at the options we were asked to look at. Some of them are very positive options, some of them are very difficult options or don't really add to the capacity that we're looking to add. And so you will see something called recommendations, and it's really things that we're suggesting that the boards consider over the next couple of weeks, taking off the table, as was referred to in the introduction. So first, the Driscoll School, which currently has 28 classrooms. It's basically a three-section school, and is located on Washington Street, on a relatively tight site, but in a dense urban area. And we're going to be making proposals as to how to expand this into a four-section school. So that means we're going to be looking at how to expand it to 36 classrooms, And the first idea that we have is to build a multi-story, take out the gymnasium. There's a modular gymnasium located to the south of the building. Take out the gymnasium, build a new multi-story classroom wing with a new gymnasium built. This stretches along Westbourne Terrace and does have the negative impact of taking out the tennis courts, which are located here. It retains all of the play area and the soft surface play area for the school, however. And we also will show you a proposal for, let me go back, a proposal for parking to be built in a decked parking area located here, with the play redone sort of on the surface. The play remains at the same level as the soft surface play area there. So there, with each of these options, we have a sort of summary slide like this, which talks in very general terms about some of the pluses and minuses of the proposal, and the general project costs of the proposal. Now, when you see costs, these are you should see them as very general. I call them order of magnitude costs that will allow you to compare one option to another option. We've done the best we can with the minimal information we have and the speed that we have to sort of get what we think are realistic costs for renovation and for new construction, but nothing at this point is going to be precise. And we're looking at a realistic sort of schedule of getting, well, the goal of getting additional capacity online by September of 2021. So we're escalating prices to sort of reflect that construction schedule. What you find for the Driscoll expansion is that we're able to add a net of 9 classrooms to get to a 4-section school. We've got some moderate amount of renovations in the balance of the school. It does have an impact, as I said, on the play area, open space, because it affects the tennis courts. And for the traffic impact, you're certainly putting additional load on the site. And in this site, we're not proposing new drop-off lanes and things like that. You've got Washington Street and Westbourne Terrace. The only change that we're proposing to make is the parking structure for faculty parking. So we looked at an option 2, which built a taller expansion, essentially stacking the classrooms on top of the gym. That's a new gym, replacing the gym that's there now. This would be an adequately sized gym. The current gym is sort of small. And this allows us to retain open space to the south of the school, in addition to retaining all of this open space. Because you're building slightly higher, and because you're going down with the bulk of the gymnasium, we're finding that that's a slightly more expensive project. That's $83 million as opposed to $77 million. It has many of the other similarities, with the exception that it does save more of the more of the open space. So here you can see the new building expansion. You can see the area of the parking garage access off of at the moment there's a surface parking lot here. We're proposing to sort of use that as a way of getting into the parking garage and burying the parking garage underneath the current play area. Also, we have expansion of certain components of the building, like the cafeteria, so that it's right size, it's large enough to handle the capacity that we'll have with a 4-section school. We then went on and looked at the Heath School. I want to add one other thing actually about Driscoll. It's because we're able to do all of our construction at one end of the school. It's a pretty convenient school in terms of the need for swing space. So the constructability of this option we think is very strong. Just wanted to add that. Then we went on and looked at the Heath School. Heath has a good amount of open space around it. We're finding that expanding into some of this open space, and what the proposal is to expand Heath from a 27 classroom, 3-section school to a 4-section school again. The expansion into some of these areas that we are looking at is a little bit challenging and sensitive, because these are your outdoor play, your recess area. This is an important setting hill for the town. And so you'll see that we look at occupation of that green space in some of these options. And we're proposing, again, taking down an undersized gymnasium and replacing it with a 2-story classroom wing located here, building a new gymnasium sort of nestled into the hillside adjacent to the access road that comes down into the parking area located here. And you're seeing expansion to the cafeteria and the kitchen area in the middle there. Drawbacks to this scheme are that it's increasing the population of the school at the same time that it's decreasing the amount of available outdoor open space. It may be possible to claim some additional area around the building for additional recess space. So seeing some drawbacks in terms of how this was how it was utilizing the site, we also looked at at another option, which was to actually take the south classroom wing and actually replace it with a new facility. Replace the gymnasium with an adequately sized gym that retains most of the play area, retains the play area on the hill and the sledding hill, and creates a new construction running through here. This also allows us, using this drive with the new construction, to provide access to a parking area that could be placed under the building. The drawback to the previous scheme is that even though we're increasing the population of the school, we're not able to really increase the parking on the site to any significant extent. So this could solve that problem. Now, the pluses and minuses to this. This is very expensive to take down a two-story classroom wing and replace it with a denser facility. Also, the Heath School has recently been renovated and added on to, partially funded by the Mass School Building Authority. And there may be an economic sort of penalty to transforming, demolishing, or changing a portion of the school that the MSBA has funded. And so that's one of the things to pay attention to here. So we're seeing with the Heath schools, option 2 does a better job of preserving the site, but it's a very expensive option, as you see, over $100 million for total project costs. Even though it's really only adding 9 classrooms to the total need for the community. It does expand the other facilities on the site to make it a more to make everything sized properly for a school of this size. It retains play area, although it doesn't expand play area, and it provides parking, but it expends a lot of money doing a relatively small number of classrooms. Next, we look at the new Lincoln School. And when we first looked at Lincoln, we kind of thought we would be looking at some additions in the back of the school. We found that there really isn't the space to do that here. And so, to me, unfortunately, the only place that we could tell that we could do additions to the school was to the south of the school, in the taking out a portion of the play area. Lincoln, again, is about 27, 28 classrooms, a 3-section school. The proposal is to expand it to a 4-section school. And so you'll find that what we're trying to do at Driscoll, Heath, and New Lincoln, in each case, is expanding a 3-section school to a 4-section school. But this is what we found that needed to be done, is a 2-story classroom wing being added, taking up maybe half of that sort of recessed play area that you have. We perceive that would be a very sensitive move to take. I'm not certain that that's a positive thing. We also look at, as we try to take steps to expand the gymnasium and the cafeteria so that they are right sized for a new, larger school, we're replacing some of those facilities in this new wing here. So we've got some construction of sort of placing maybe the bulk of the gymnasium underground, or at least recessed into the ground, or possibly going up for a 3rd floor with this. Our concerns are the bulk of the building and just the occupancy of what looks like a very important neighborhood open space. We also, even though we're expanding the size of the school, we do not see an opportunity really here to expand parking on the site. So when we looked at the evaluation criteria here, this is still the lower number. Isn't that number supposed to be 70? Do you recall? it occurs, we have some summary sheets that it'll be in, but it's, as we took the step to increase the size of the gymnasium, the size of the cafeteria, we realized that we needed to add some additional space to that pure classroom wing that we initially proposed. Okay. So that would be about $70 million total project cost. And let me explain. The project cost is the construction cost plus all the soft costs that go along with putting up a facility. And the soft costs include things like the cost of surveys, geotechnical investigation, architect's fees, furniture and equipment, and just all the other things that are specifically the contractor's investment. So summarizing the various options we looked at here, the two options that we talked about at Driscoll, the two options at Heath, and the one option at Lincoln, these, again, are just our professionals. We look at it professionally, and we think what's worth pursuing and what's not worth pursuing. We are thinking that the second option at Heath of replacing that south classroom wing is disruptive and expensive for a relatively small net gain, and that the Lincoln option results in a significant loss of play area and open space around the building, and also is not able to increase parking. There are pluses and minuses with all of these options. Like the Heath option one also doesn't increase parking, but it's a more affordable option. We thought we would leave it on the table. That might be worth looking into something to see how we could work with the existing play areas to increase their size and their efficiency, making use of the open space around the school. So we left that on the table.
What was the estimate on Heath 1?
On each one?
Yeah.
I have it here.
75? And nine net new classrooms?
Yeah, Heath one is 75 million, and it is 9 classrooms, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And you said Heath one, and I thought you said each one, so.
Heath 1.
Okay, so moving on, and again, I just want to re-emphasize, this is just our first take. The boards haven't had a chance to weigh in on this at all. I go first to the Pierce options, then we'll do the Baker options, and you'll see that there are several options with each of these. At Pierce, we have a 3-3 option, and the way these options are labeled, if it says Pierce 3 or Pierce 5 or whatever, it means it's a 3-section school or a 5-section school. And when it says Pierce 3-3, it means that it's the existing Pierce school is renovated as a 3-section school, and then there's a new 3-section school placed on the same site. The one exception to that terminology is Pierce K5, 6, 7, 8, which is similar to Pierce 3-3, with the exception that this is a proposal rather than 2 independent K8 schools. You're renovating the existing building into a K5 school with 6 sections, and building a new, essentially middle school adjacent to it for grades 6, 7, and 8 with 18 sections. Just going through those options. First of all, the Pierce site, which this is School Street, Harvard Street, Washington Street, and this white square here is the roof of the town hall. This is the health building, and this is the library. Pierce is divided into different wings. There's the A wing, which is where most of the classrooms are located. There's the B wing, where the support spaces are, the cafeteria, the gymnasium. There's the Pierce primary, or the historic Pierce building. And sitting in the middle of it all is a little addition. It was called the C wing, which has 5 classrooms in it. It's a handicap accessibility nightmare. You'll see in several of the options, we're looking at taking that down and replacing it. In other options, we're saving it. You will also see, because we were asked to look at this site, that we're leasing space right now for classrooms in this commercial building at 62 Harvard Street. We were asked to look at these sites and get different enrollments in them, and as we look at them, we're proposing in some cases the purchase of this private property. In some cases, in order to make it work, we're saying, this will work only if you purchase some additional property. And you will see also that in some cases, when we're with the larger sites, the larger proposals for this site, we're even proposing that a replacement is going to be required for the health center. We've been hearing that from people. I don't know if that's a starter or a non-starter, but in order to make these things fit on this already very crowded urban site, these are the steps that we've had to take. So as we go through these, I will show you first Pierce 3.3. The challenge to this is that the Pierce School is a very challenging school to renovate and add on to. We find that it has a lot of handicap accessibility problems that we think are very expensive to correct. It has some acoustic problems in the open classroom wing over here that are correctable, but also require some cost. So in this scheme, we're keeping this as a totally independent school, and then we're developing a new 3-section school here. In order to keep these completely independent, because we don't want to touch the other school, the existing school. We don't want to trigger renovations of it. We're saying that in order for this to really work comfortably, you've got to look at, can you find additional properties to expand the footprint of this this new school building. We're always assuming, and you'll see that we have various options. We have a low renovation cost and a high renovation cost here. The low renovation cost for the existing Pierce building will be if you're trying to do it without hitting a threshold that requires full handicap accessibility compliance for the building. And then the high one is saying, well, we're just going to do a great job renovating that school. You see a great difference in the cost of those. So in any event, this is putting a total of about 1,100 seats on this campus. The school at the moment is 850, I think. And so this is a significant increase on a relatively tight site. The open space is across School Street over here, and there are some play areas located around on the existing site. But to look at this is adding a total of 17 classrooms to the total component of classrooms in the town of Brookline for $111 million. It requires property acquisitions. It requires the relocation of the health center, and it includes included in that number is below grade parking, sort of the extension of the current below grade parking that you have. It really, the streets and things around the site stay as they are, so you're adding additional students, but you're not adding additional space for queuing. So that has a sort of a traffic impact.
Excuse me. I assume that this does not include the cost of relocating the health center.
Correct.
This does
Okay.
not include the cost of
So-
relocating the health center. It
The
also
investment of that?
It also, no, we haven't looked at that.
We'd have to find a site.
Or acquiring the,
Or acquiring, that's what I was going to add, is it also doesn't include the cost of acquiring extra property. So that's why we include those in the cost considerations area there. So on the summary sheet, you'll always see a diamond that says there's another cost that you have to figure out what that is. Would the health center be incorporated into the school? Would it be a different site? Is this a no-go because it's a relatively new health center and you don't want to consider relocating it? There are questions like that come up. The next option is the Pierce K5, 6, 7, 8. Because the K5 has 36 classrooms in it as opposed to 27, making use of the Pierce primary and the A wing, we've got we've got to put more students in this portion of the building, but that also allows us to build a smaller addition located here, a smaller, essentially, middle school. The nice thing about doing it this way, if you find spaces that are undersized at the existing Pierce, like the gymnasium, the cafeteria are undersized, you can make a good argument that you could leave those that size because you're going to be building adequately sized cafeteria and gymnasium and things like that over here with the middle school. And you might decide that you could take, for instance, your fifth graders, which are still over here taking classes, and decide that they have lunch over here in order to allow us to keep the costs of renovating and changing this space around down. Just sort of part of the strategy of how this might be made more viable. It's still a very dense urban site. The open space is still across here. And again, we're looking at parking, below grade here, sort of continuing the below grade parking that occurs on many parts of the site. I see that was a change. The cost there should be, where it says 87, should read $103 million. That's for the minimum renovation where we're not doing an overall handicap accessibility upgrade to the building, but we are making acoustic improvements and things along those lines. And the other one for a full renovation is $175 million. That'll be changed for the version that goes up on the website. Sorry about that. We changed the summary sheets. It didn't get into these sheets here, I guess. So similar issues in terms of adding students without adding a space for queuing. We are adding parking. We're adding students without adding play space per se. You still go across the street for the play space, it does add 17 classrooms, just like the other option, to the total number of classrooms that you have. The next thing we looked at is, could we make the existing Pierce operate as a 3-section school and build a new 4-section school? So this is putting a total of, the other projects were 11, the other two options we looked at were 1,100 seats. This is putting a total of 1,300 seats on the site. And so it's really a very crowded option. And again, in order, the new building, even though we're trying to keep it as compact as possible, we're showing it as 5 stories tall, is kind of sprawling, and we're sort of saying, in order to really make this work, even at 5 stories, we've got to look at additional property. We're architects. We don't buy people's property, so don't be too alarmed that we're showing certain properties We're just saying, in order to make this work, this is the sort of thing you have to do. The health center is replaced. Properties on Harvard Street are replaced. And this may be considered viable or not viable by the town of Brookline. The cost of this is that right? 141. I'm sorry that these numbers didn't get updated. And for is that for the minimum renovation where you don't do full ADA compliance, and then for the full renovation, it's $207 million. As I said, the Pierce School is a very expensive school to renovate because of the way it's constructed and the way it's configured. And we also looked at a Pierce 4.3. Pierce 4.3 is particularly difficult to do because we have to expand the existing Pierce to be a 4-section K-8 school, and we're finding that very difficult to do. In this, we're taking out that C wing that I talked about earlier and building classrooms and things like that there. We've got to expand the cafeteria. So we're talking about building a cafeteria forum in the sort of the motor court, if you will. The cars will still enter and go underneath it. We'd be building from the second floor up. And we are looking for a way to put a full-size gymnasium into this building, and the only thing we can think of is going across the street and using that bridge as access. And this may easily not be practical. Plus, in addition to that, you're building a large school facility on the site. Again, this is a very crowded site with 1,300 students. No additional drop-off and pick-up accommodations. You do have additional parking underground, no additional play space, but other parts of the building are brought up to date.
Pip, a
Yes.
question on that slide,
Yes.
the previous one.
No, here's the number. Yes.
So the blue, dark blue and light blue is a 36 classroom complete, four section 36 classroom school.
Yes.
Can you, and then there's a new school off to the side. Can you go to the K568 slide earlier? So this one, you don't need to make any additions to the dark blue existing school, but it's still a 36 classroom K5.
Yes.
Is there really that much of a programmatic difference between the two?
There really is, because for one thing, at this facility, you're only doing K5, you're not doing the 8th graders. You're not doing adequate science labs, for instance. You're making use of this building to cheat on things like, well, we're not going to expand that gym because we are going to build a full-size gym here. We're not going to expand this cafeteria because we're going to build a full-size cafeteria here. And some of the kids, the youngest kids, can continue to eat lunch here, and the older kids can eat lunch here. It's kind of a great way of sharing the resources between the new building and the old building and allowing you sort of an escape valve when you don't want to make an improvement to the old building. You have an option of an adjacent new facility that's related to it. It's related to it. To me, it's unlike the 3-3 where there are two separate schools on the site. So really each school needs to be independent. And so this also it makes use of that C wing that I talked about. There's 5 classrooms in there, and that's how we get from 30. If we renovate this building ideally, we come up with 32 classrooms in it, because ideally that C wing is taken out because we can't figure out how to make it handicap accessible. If you've been in there, every classroom's on a sort of a different level. But the C wing does have 5 classrooms in it, pushes it up to 37 classrooms, so that's how you get to a 4-section school relatively easily there.
Thank you.
It's as simple as that. That's 3-4, 4-3. 4-3 is really, there's the 204 million. And, all right, yeah, that's close enough. And I think I talked about the pluses and minuses of that. That adds, both of these options, by the way, I didn't say, add a net of 26 classrooms to the school system, which is a good amount.
And all of the cost numbers you're giving us also, then you have to add on top of that property acquisition.
Yes, always have to add property acquisition and relocation of the health center if it's one of the options where we're relocating the health center, yes. The cost of the parking structure we are incorporating in. We were asked to look at a four-section Pierce. So the nice thing about this, unlike the last four-section Pierce you looked at for the last school, is that we can expand on site because we're not putting an additional school on the site. So we're not having to expand across the street and things like that. We are putting a new construction through here with a new gymnasium and expanded cafeteria and things like that here. Because this is so intimately engaged with the existing building, we're assuming that you have to do a full renovation of this school. You don't have the option of doing a non-ADA compliant renovation of the school. And this has, this is great. You'll see it costs a good amount of money. It, however, does not add to what we're really trying to do here, which is to add classroom capacity. In fact, you can see here it subtracts one classroom from the overall number of classrooms in the facility. So it makes a wonderful Pierce school. It makes a modern, full four-section Pierce school with all the facilities that it should have.
It actually subtracts 5 from what we have today.
Because I'm not including the
Pierce loft. Yeah,
the
you're
lease.
right. It subtracts
Yeah.
1, right?
And so you're spending $117 million, and you're losing a classroom. So at that rate,
Plus property acquisition.
plus property acquisition, yes, exactly. But you don't have to relocate the health center. Then we looked at a Pierce 5, essentially 5 sections is the devotion school program, which is now under construction. It would be for a total of about 950 seats, 45 classrooms. This is without an additional school on site, so we have a major new wing being added that expands from the existing building, takes out that C wing and expands toward Harvard Street, and makes an assumption that wedge-shaped commercial building, it becomes a part of the property. It does fill in the cafe forum and makes for what could be a very nice Pierce 5-section school that'll give you a total add of 8 classrooms into the facility, into the system, I should say. Again, parking underneath, but when I go to here, you'll see that there's a cost of $142 million total project costs for a net add of just 8 classrooms. It requires you add to that the cost of purchasing property also. So, because the cost of renovating Pierce was so expensive, we did go back and we looked at, well, what if you really just knocked the whole thing down and built the classrooms that you're looking for? And what's a little surprising to me is that we were actually finding that it's less expensive than some of the Pierce options. And so what we're showing here is a very large. This is just this is not to be mistaken for design, but it shows sort of how we have to occupy the site in order to make such a large school of 1,100 seats that work on the site. This is essentially what we're calling the Pierce 3-3 all new. So the proposal here is that we would build two 3-section schools adjacent to each other, so that you feel like a student feels like they're living in a smaller school community. But we are getting that 1,100 seat capacity.
This also took the strategy of not using the Harvard 62 Harvard.
Yes, yes. So it's the option that doesn't purchase any property. It leaves the health center there, and also the Pierce primary or the Pierce Historic is also retained.
And there's also a full school site.
Oh, so the division. Well, you see the blue classrooms and the orange classrooms. You have a gym in the middle. So the blue is one and the orange is another. The gym big gym in the middle is divided so that you can make use of either side for the two schools. You're building a 12,000 square foot gymnasium.
How many stories is this?
4.
This is 4 stories
Plus
tall.
A full level of parking. Sorry, we didn't get
Underneath.
the
Okay.
data there, but there would be it's a full parking
Oh,
garage.
it says right there, full floors, okay.
So
Yeah.
it sounds like it's one building occupied by 2 schools, is that right?
Yes, but we haven't designed it. We came up with this after our meeting this morning, because we were just fretting about the cost of the renovations because they were so high, and we looked back at the new construction and we saw that the cost of the new construction. Oh, where is it? It's not there. It's $167 million to take the building down and build these 2 new schools. You will recall that we have looked at some of these options that give you 1,100 seats, costing higher than that, costing $200 million. And so, because, plus property acquisition is very good to point out, because the Pierce building is it's a lovable building, but it's a very difficult building to work with. Well, it's interesting. People have strong feelings about it. Some people really like it. Some people really dislike it. So it provokes strong feelings from people. So we looked at all the Pierce options, and we put the Pierce New down at the bottom, and we talked about which ones we thought really weren't worth pursuing. An easy one to point out is Pierce 4, where you're spending over $100 million and you're reducing the size, the numbers of classrooms that you have. Both of these, Pierce 3-4 and 4-3, where you're putting 1,300 students on the site, really felt to us like with the traffic we're generating, with the open space that we have, the percentage of increase to the number of students on the site is so large to not provide additional open space. It seemed like a real encumbrance. They're very expensive solutions, and we were just suggesting. Also, with multiple property that need to be relocated, taken, plus the relocation of the health center. Now, Pierce 3-3 is the same thing, smaller number of students at 1,100. But it does require the relocation of the health center, and also requires the purchase of a couple of properties.
I think we could actually rapidly take one option off the table without a lot of debate, which would be the second to last one, because it's mentioned twice.
Oh. We just cut.
So
the
we've
veggie
accomplished
pie.
something already.
Yes, okay.
Teamwork.
Good. All right, we'll do that. Then we looked at Baker. We looked at the same options at Baker, with the exception that we didn't look at a total demolition and replacing of the Baker school. As we look into Baker, we can see that it's a very complex site. If you see this is Beverly Road arcing up here. An important factor is going to be Jerry Road, that's part of the Hancock Village, that comes off of what I call Grove Street, and I think at that point the name has changed to something else. Independence Way or something like that. But that, with some of these options that you look at, you'll see that that becomes an important factor. There's an incredible change in grade from the high point here down into the horse sanctuary, which sort of skirts the property on the south side. Tennis courts located at the horse sanctuary level, and then the building sort of located up on top of sort of a plateau over here. This is the old building and then a 1950s wing. And for simplification, I'll call this the original building and this the 1950s wing, but there are other additions and things like that. And then there's a plateau here with the softball field located on it. We quickly saw that there were complex environmental issues with the property. There is the blue dotted line that runs through here is a stream of some sort that may easily not be an intermittent stream, may be protected by the Rivers Protection Act. If it is, red is the border of the Rivers Protection Act protection area. It sort of takes up most of the tennis court area. We have identified an old flagging of wetlands that runs through the horse sanctuary around here. Those wetlands are being reflagged today. This is from the 90s, I think. But at the moment, this is the best indication that we have so far. They will be reflagged as a part of this project. You see a line here, which is a 100-foot buffer zone. That's a state mandated buffer zone. And then there's a town of Brookline 150-foot buffer zone that is also indicated on here. So we realize that with a lot of these options where we may be intruding on the buffer zones, intruding on for the river or for the wetlands areas, that we have a conservation process to go through.
What's the setback between the stream channel and the red line?
It's 200 feet.
200 feet.
Mm-hmm. It's a 200-foot buffer. As I understand, it hasn't been clearly established that it exists, but like people say, they always see water running in that. It looks like a non-intermittent stream to people, so we're assuming that that is the case. So there hasn't been a formal determination made at this point. Nevertheless, we're pointing out these things out as complications, something you have to be aware of as you go ahead into the Baker's site that must be wrestled with. So we looked at a 3-3 option. And I will say that we met with representatives of Hancock Village who encouraged us to consider using Jerry Road as a second drop-off area. It loops, it's a one-way loop off of Independence, and so we're showing that with a pedestrian access to a building that might occupy the area of the tennis courts, and I'll talk about that in a little detail in a second. It's a multi-story building that then brings you up to the level of the original building and bridges across this existing road that's located here. The existing road comes to about here. The 1950s wing is here, and it stops. In this scheme, we're proposing that loop be continued out to Beverly Road here. So you're getting a very long sort of drop-off road that comes in and out there. Plus, you're getting the advantage of a new drop-off area down here. We think that this goes a long way toward relieving some of the congestion on Beverly Road by splitting it into two places. So you'll see various options we have which make use of that area. But this isn't a slam dunk. This is a very difficult thing to do in terms of getting approvals through conservation, et cetera, with this. Because you're building in what is probably within the buffer, both of the wetlands and of the river. By doing this, we're able to do a fully sort of modern 3-section school for the existing Baker, with the addition of this wing here, and a second 3-section school sort of curving around the softball field, staying as far as we can outside of the buffers, but you see that it's touching a little bit, we'd have to refine that. And then you will see that the road does certainly intrude into the buffer zone areas. So this is a very challenging option. It's a very challenging site, frankly. We're able to increase to about 1,100 seats on the campus, which is giving us a net increase of 15 classrooms over what's there now. Causes us to replace the 1950s wing in order to build this facility. We're able to preserve the softball field, and we're talking about ways of working in additional play areas around the building in order to maximize that as much as possible. This it isn't at all a slam dunk, as I said, that we're going to be able to proceed on something like this, but the advantages of having a second drop-off area from Jerry Road seem so important that it's worth spending a little bit of effort looking into it, rather than simply saying, no, that's too difficult, we're not going to investigate that, particularly since the Hancock Village people seem amenable to it. So this would increase the walking traffic, the pedestrian access to the school from Hancock Village. It would also give you different options for drop-off, and it gives you those sorts of advantages. One of the goals here, as we've met with the conservation agent to talk about the possibilities here, would be to stop using the horse sanctuary area as a recreation space for the kids, as they sort of take recess out here and spill out into the sanctuary, and really emphasize its use as an educational facility, because it's a great place with the boardwalk and things like that. So this is, so if Shin would stop changing numbers, so the new numbers, well, this is close. This is 168 and 205. And the difference there is, depending on how much renovation you do to the existing Baker School. Because we see this has to be phased construction, that's something that's going to be a cost impact. And as I say that these costs have been escalated, assuming they were bringing things online in 2021, if you're doing phased projects and you have a second phase that goes on after that, the cost of that second phase would have to be escalated again. We haven't done that until we know what configuration and what schedule we're following. So we've only given the escalation to 2021. As I say here, sensitive environmental permitting is one of the major issues. That's certainly true with just about all of these Baker options. Costly parking structure. But this option does have a significant impact on traffic and pedestrian because of the access to Jerry Road. It has negative. It's the loss of the tennis courts. We've looked at how we could relocate tennis courts on the property, but the tennis courts take up a good amount of space, and we're looking into that. We haven't achieved that yet. So we looked at K5, 6, 7, 8. So in this case, we're building a new building here on the tennis courts again that is basically the middle school. And then we looked at the Baker School, in this case retaining the 1950s wing, and we looked at how much we had to expand it in order to make it operate as a fully functional, modern K-5 school, section K-5 school. And so we were seeing that we needed to place a new wing, academic wing on the building that sort of nestled between the 50s wing and the softball field. And we're making sort of an assumption that the end of it, which is a multi-purpose room, sort of gets nipped off and reconstructed as a part of this. This creates a little courtyard play space, which could be sort of nice, a little play area located over here. Again, we're establishing this long loop road for drop-off and pickup. What a great improvement that is over this little loop that you have here. And then we also have the Jerry Road impact. So, I mean, the great thing about this is that while we're increasing the student capacity on the site, we're greatly increasing the queuing area for the property. Again, the same sort of environmental issues. We looked at the option of saying, okay, but what if we're not able, as we look at the environmental issues of building on the tennis courts, and we build a new upper school here rather than down here. This requires the demolition of the 50s wing in order to give space for this. And so to augment that, we're putting in a new academic wing, adding on to the Baker School here. So this would be the K-5. This would be the 6, 7, 8. We're, again, keeping the building as much as we can out of the wetland buffer, but the road does intrude into the wetland buffer and loop out here, loop out onto Beverly Road again. We're proposing that we put parking underneath this new building here in order to increase the parking capacity of the site as the population increases. And we talk about cheating the play area over a little bit here just to maximize the amount of play area that we can get on the site. And obviously you still have the tennis courts located here. The downside to this is you don't have access from Jerry Road for queuing. Now, people do queue on Jerry Road, but you have to walk up a long flight of steps to get into the building. In order to call something an actual entrance into the building, it has to be accessible according to codes these days. We can't really call that accessible. So we would look at how many, and we are looking at how many parents drop off here anyway, but it won't be as effective as if you have the contact with the building. So when there's a building there, obviously I haven't stated this, but you go into the building and you can go upstairs or an elevator to the level and go over to the main building. With just the tennis courts there, you obviously have to scale the stairs and then go across the drive. Continuing, we're seeing the cost for this varying between 143 to 196.
This is both options?
Yeah, this is this option and this option.
Okay.
Yes. As we get tired, we group the options in different ways. So here you have the cost of that. It does add 15 classrooms to the town of Brookline's collection of classrooms, and it does, I think, improve the drop-off pick-off existence. And we're doing everything we can in order to increase the size of the play areas in this option, plus retaining the tennis courts. Now, we looked at the 3-4 and the 4-3 options, and part of when I say that is we didn't do 1-3-4 and then 1-4-3, but we did two options that could either serve for either of them. This option touches the tennis courts, occupies the tennis courts, has the access from Jerry Road, And the next option I show you says, well, let's say we can't use the tennis courts and it moves the building over to here. And you will see that that intrudes into play space. So this option puts a lot of capacity, let's say, on the site. You're up to 1,300 students here. You have a loop road that goes between the buildings. You know, this is actually the existing road that you all know at the moment that goes behind the 50s wing, but we're continuing it up to Beverly Road. It retains the play area. It looks at expanding that a little bit. It looks at smaller play areas for tot lots and things like that in convenient areas around the building where we can get a hold of them in order to maximize places for kids to play. It's a significant increase in the student population with an incremental increase in the amount of play area, but at least we're getting some increase in play area here. This, again, has the same sort of environmental hurdles to get over as the other buildings that we've looked at, the other options that we've looked at. This is the other option. Again, we're saying this is either the 4-3 or the 3-4 with some modifications. This is trying to keep the building up out of the wetland buffer zone. Again, the drive is in the wetland buffer zone, and you will see that that does have an impact on the softball field. Still a good amount of play area there. We would need to, as with any of these, look at how to redesign these play areas to be more intensive use. I want to point out this is what we did at the Devotion School. As we increased the Devotion population, Devotion had a softball field and has moved to a synthetic turf soccer field and an assembly of age-specific play areas to increase the intensity of use of the play areas on the site to accommodate more people on the same amount of property. This it makes the environmental hurdles easier than the last one, but you're still going to have some issues with wetlands buffers and how that road gets done. Making sure that whatever we do, and we would do that with any of these options, make sure that the water quality of the runoff into the horse sanctuary is preserved and made excellent. So that we're preserving or making the horse sanctuary a little bit better, more resilient than it is right now. This is a very expensive cost for both of these options because they're very large options for 1,300 students, including the expensive costs with the Baker School itself and then the size of the new building. Now, there obviously would be a range there between the 3-4 and the 4-3, and as I said, we didn't really look closely into that difference. We figured we were building the same amount of square footage with either option. It's just some of the square footage would be associated with the existing Baker building, with additions to the existing Baker building, and some would be associated with the new facility. Sensitive environmental permitting is always an issue on the Baker site. So we looked at Baker 4. We looked at Baker becoming a 4-section school for about 750 students. Baker at the moment is a little bit larger than that, so you're sort of losing capacity. In order for it to really function as a fully functional, modern 4-section school with adequately sized gymnasia, cafeteria, art, music facilities, and things like that, we're finding that we have to add that classroom wing. It was similar to a classroom wing that we added in a different scheme. It's nestled between the existing playfield and the 1950s wing. We're talking about ways of extending the play area a little bit, creating a new play area here with parking below in order to get the parking that we need on the site. This obviously is entirely an uphill site. It doesn't affect the tennis courts. And the number here is $97 million. because $97 million is smaller than the others because you're building a simple classroom addition and then doing some renovations to the Baker School. So it makes sense. And then here's Baker 5. And I've got two options for this. Baker 5 is, again, essentially the devotion school program. And for this first option, we were saying, well, let's use the tennis courts and let's do this accessible entry from Jerry Road, and let's encourage as much drop-off and pick-up on Jerry Road as possible. You go up in a multi-story building that bridges over to the existing building, the existing Baker School. You do the expansion of facilities that you need, like a full-size gym and things like that, in the new addition. And you provide a five-section school with all the amenities that a modern five-section school would have, as though you were building it new. This adds a net capacity of, is 6 classrooms or is it 8 classrooms? 6 classrooms to the complex. Then we looked at another option, just again saying, well, what if we can't use the tennis court? If that proves not permittable. And in this case, what we've done is we've taken down essentially half of the 1950s wing, the sort of L portion of it, and this allowed us to build a new academic wing with a new gymnasium abutting the softball field, which keeps the building out of obviously out of the rivers area and the wetlands areas, but you still have issues with the road. But you also have the advantage of a very long drop-off area for queuing. And we are dealing with parking and things like that by doing structured parking below this addition here, so that we're increasing the parking facilities on the site. This is a total of 950 seats, we have two options to look at there. Now the cost for these two options, the distinction? Yeah, that's fine. One is very close, 142 to 144 million dollars, and so the problem is it only gives you a net gain of a total of 6 classrooms. It does improve certainly the school. It modernizes the school essentially without adding a whole lot of capacity. So I'm moving on to my overview of the Baker options and things that as we look at it, we think it may not be really worth pursuing. Is once again, I'll go to Baker 4 because it does not expand capacity. And our charge with this study was to look at ways of expanding the classroom capacity in the town. And then these two K4, 3-4 and 4-3 were so large that they were increasing significantly, a significant percentage increase in the number of students on site. And we really were not able to increase open space anything like proportionately. We're providing some parking facilities and things like that. We have to look more closely to see if we're providing adequate parking facilities for this increase in the faculty that it would have. These are very expensive options, and so we're just suggesting that those might be options that might not be pursued. So as I go and sort of summarize all the options that we sort of put on the table, you see the modest additions to the Heath School, the two different, the additions to the Heath School is the option that adds the small additions to either end of the Heath School, and has some effect on the play area, but we would work with a landscape architect to see if we can mitigate those effects. That you've got the Driscoll's options 1 and option 2. Option 2 is the one that's a little bit more compact and vertical and retains the tennis courts. You've got the Pierce K5 and 6, 7, 8 option, and the Pierce 5 option, which adds maybe 8 classrooms, but we thought it would be worth keeping that on the table to look at. Then we've got the Baker 3-3 options, which we just looked at, the Baker K5 through 6, 7, 8, and there are different versions of those options depending on whether or not the tennis courts can be used in each of those cases. And we left the Baker 5 on the table also, although you're spending a good amount of money and not really adding many classrooms to it. We then summarized what these costs were for each of the options, and along with the net gain in classrooms. And we have been informed in accordance with the enrollment projections that we're seeing in town by the town. The goal is to add about 32 classrooms to the Brookline K-8 school system. So you can look at that and see how the different options contribute to that and what the costs are. I've gone through a lot. This will be posted on the website so people can digest it and think about things for the Monday meeting and beyond. But I will point out that on the website that we do have some more detailed summaries of the costs, so you can see how we arrived at these things with a little bit more detail, and we have another level of detail beyond that. This is the summary chart where this column means that you've got swing space issues to be concerned about. Swing space can be a cost to the town, and this column indicates where we have property acquisition issues. This is the Pierce School, so you see that these are all the different options for the Pierce School. You see a lot of diamonds located there. And this is the Baker School. It has some swing space options, no property acquisition issues. And there could be a column added here that would have an asterisk on just about each of them, which says environmental hurdles that need to be crossed.
Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff?
Thank you. Can you just go back to the cost comparison slide? It was a couple slides ago. So that cost does or does not include site acquisition and relocating the public health building?
Right, because we don't know what
No, not right. It was a yes or no question.
They do not.
Does not.
Does not include the cost.
Okay. So can I just pause there? I think this slide is going to really confuse people. If
Okay.
there are tens of millions of dollars of costs that are not included on some of these options but not others, without explaining that to people, it's going to be this slide will confuse people, if that makes sense.
So should we put an asterisk, say, or something?
The
or a
magic
diamond?
asterisk.
Well, but I think an
very
asterisk
least.
with some sort of, with some sort of explanation. I mean, if site acquisition is going to be, and relocating a building literally is tens of millions of dollars, multiple, and that is the delta between some of these options, it's going to confuse people. So I think more than an asterisk, I think it needs to, if we don't have any sort of round number as to those options, I just think, I feel very uncomfortable with somebody who didn't get the voiceover to this.
Okay, so we certainly didn't.
That's okay.
We don't have round numbers.
Of course,
We don't
no,
have round numbers.
Well, that's okay. I just don't know what to do with some of these because people will try to compare them and they're not, it's apples and oranges.
I think at minimum there needs to be a standalone slide that has those two caveats in bold letters. I don't know if an asterisk is enough on this, but assuming people are going to look at the entire presentation as a whole, call those two caveats out explicitly as you go through.
Well, I agree with Ben, I think that, and Susan, that I think, but, you could just indicate also plus signs, property acquisition, if you have to acquire 2 properties, that's 2 pluses, plus the moving the health building, that's 3 pluses. So that you get an order of magnitude of the pluses, basically.
Yes, we can certainly do that.
Do any of those recommended options include relocating the health building? I thought you'd eliminated most of the options that made that building relocate.
I personally thought that relocating the health center was probably a non-starter for the town, and so I did not recommend pursuing any of the options that included relocating the health center. No, there were 3 of them, and they each have dotted lines through them.
Ms. Chalupsky, speak into the mic. Well,
okay, are we good now? So on 2 of the options, there were tennis courts that we were thinking of building on. How were those acquired, those tennis courts? How were they built? Because we've had tennis courts in the past that have been problematic. And I just want to know, who owns those tennis courts? Is it the town? Is it the schools?
I'm told.
And are they...
I'm told it's the schools.
To my knowledge, the Baker School property is a single undivided property. It was acquired about 85 years ago, and all of the improvements are school property.
So the schools built the tennis courts there?
It's all part of the school, but it's obviously, you have to, the tennis courts have been there for a long time. It's been in community, it's can be read in different ways, but it's not a park, it's a school property.
But the good news is we don't have a federal grant.
Well, that was part of my question, on either one.
But we have already been informed by attorneys for concerned citizens that we can expect challenges.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lynn Jones.
I have a big question that's not going to be easy to answer. I just want to lay it out there. From the comparison of costs between various options, say for Pierce, it wasn't always clear to me to what extent that project, which added capacity, included renovations that would probably be done anyway and that the town would pay for sooner or later. And I'll just point out the one example of a totally new, all-new construction on the Pierce site that presumably generates a wonderful modern school was $167 million, if I remember correctly. And then simply renovating Pierce to make it what you described as a wonderful school would be $117 million. So that seems like a pretty good value for the marginal cost of $50 million, just off the cuff. But I don't know to what extent some of the other renovations plus additions included renovations that will eventually be part of the town's CIP because they'll be necessary as part of the usual life cycle. So I'm not sure if there's an easy answer to that question, but in a general comment, it seemed to be illustrated by the comparison between the only renovate and the all-new Pierce. Another question on Pierce, though. None of the options included demolition of what you call Pierce Primary, the older historic building, nor did they include any attempt to build on air rights or otherwise utilize the town-owned parking lot there. Was there a reason for excluding those properties, but still looking at the option of eminent domain or even taking the health building?
To go to your first question first, when you look at the we have a swing in cost between the minimal renovation and the full renovation. I can't speak at all to what would be in the CIP eventually, because the buildings have been there for 50 years or something like that, and they are the way they are. The town of Brookline does a pretty good job of keeping its buildings up. I would look at, and then also the choice of what gets done is something that would be the product of working with the town to determine that. I would look at that A-wing, big sort of classroom, cathedral, open space area with a library down at the base of it, and look at some significant acoustic improvements into that space. I don't know that that's the choice that the town would make if it was going on and was spending, $10 million in 5 years or something like that. That would be a primary thing that I would do. When we look at the full renovation, we're probably looking at really some significant transformations to the school in order to put handicap toilets in, accessibility in various places. The school has a lot of doors that are like 18 inches wide, literally, and you're supposed to be like a minimum of 3 feet. And opening up things like that, providing breakout space in some of the modern 21st century sort of spaces, improving science labs, looking at ways to expand the cafeteria, maybe into adjacent spaces and things like that. So you get a whole lot of work done under that full renovation that may be beyond what you'd be proposing to do in a CIP, unless it was a significant project moving ahead at some point. So the second question was, remind me. Oh, yes.
Parking lots and areas over the town hall parking lot.
Yes, and actually we did. So one of the things that we saw about historic Pierce is it was a lot of classrooms in a relatively dense cluster. And so we found that the need to replace it wasn't as much as certain other things. You could, it's basically 2 floors, but it's got 12 classrooms in a very small area of space, so we thought it was very efficient. You could take it down and put up 3 floors or 4 floors or something like that. So you could increase the number of classrooms there. We were thinking we got a lot of classrooms relatively cheaply, inexpensively, at historic Pierce, so we retained it. And I think we wondered about building in the middle of the parking lot. We certainly built in the turnaround that currently serves the Pierce building behind the commercial building. And we did not show an option that went all the way over and used essentially what you're calling air rights over the town hall parking lot, if you will. I'm not sure that couldn't be done. It makes for a very dense site, but maybe that it actually is something that makes sense. You would have a lot of internalness to the building, but I can't say, as I'm thinking about it now, that wouldn't work and that might save the cost of acquiring property. Now, it would require reconstructing the garage that's below the parking lot, and so there would be some cost related to that. And I would say, yes, you're right. We haven't looked at that very closely, besides just pondering whether it made some sort of visual sense to us, and we didn't go very far with it.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, speaking of pondering, we have a lot to ponder about. So this is a lot of information. This is going to go up on the website. We'll be seeking public comment on Monday at, 7 o'clock at the high school. So, wow. Okay, thank you very much for a great presentation. And I think that's it for now. Probably.
We're reconvening the February 8th school committee meeting with just the school committee, having spent the last hour and 40 minutes we're getting a report from the Joe Connolly and HMFH upstairs in the Board of Selectmen's room on the midpoint report on the ninth school site evaluation, school expansion site evaluation study. And we have one agenda item for this continuing school committee meeting, which is a finance update, and then we will go into vote and go into executive session to deal with one issue, and then we will come back following that and reconvene in open session. So our agenda item, I don't have an agenda, or maybe I left it upstairs, is finance update. Finance update. Ms. Stram.
Okay, so I'd like Mary Ellen to come back in for the town school partnership update, but for just to let everyone know who wasn't at finance subcommittee on Tuesday morning, we did take up the agenda item that was brought in the last school committee meeting around how many classrooms do we have that are over our guidelines, and what would be required to maintain our guidelines or live within our guidelines next year. And the sort of the answer that we got in terms of resourcing is that there, in many cases, with the opening of devotion, we believe that we can correct a lot of those classes. But there is some risk, in particular as it pertains to Runkle and Driscoll, that we may not be able to. So what we recommended was that we put 5 additional paraprofessional positions unfunded in the budget because we don't actually know that we need them. But there'd be 5 FTEs in the budget, and that we would commit to removing money from the supplies budget to fund those positions if they indeed are needed. So that's sort of the upshot recommendation coming out of finance, and I look forward to full school committee discussing that recommendation. And then Mary Ellen, do you want to give the committee an update, if you can, on the town school partnership allocation and what changes to our revenue resulted from it?
So the town school partnership meeting was earlier this evening. What the result, and we covered this, I believe, in our last presentation, but I just want to make sure we sort of point out, is that they've moved the $75,000 that we allocated, or has been proposed to be allocated to the public buildings department. So the allocation that you would see on any public document for the town school partnership, the difference between what I was showing in our last meeting to that document is $75,000 because it's in public buildings. And the other sort of nuance of that is because of utility savings that have been occurring due to the work that Charlie's been doing in terms of changing out lighting and saving electricity, you don't actually see a $75,000 increase on the line for public buildings. So you see a net number there. But Melissa has assured me that his increase in his maintenance line is there, and I'll be following up with her on that level of detail. So I just want to make sure the committee is aware, and the next presentation we'll have is we'll start aligning our numbers to the town school partnership number. So I believe that's a change we'll make in the presentation for the public hearing, but make sure that people know that we have allocated funds to the public building department as part of a no override budget. So it's just a reconciliation piece that you may stumble on. But other than that, the revenue that we talked about the last time hasn't changed. Allocations haven't changed. And we're still waiting, as we always have this time of year, we're always still waiting for the governor's budget and the legislature to make their decision, which will happen sometime in June, well after town meeting occurs and votes on our appropriation. Is there any, and we also talked about the building projects as well as updating the town school partnership on the 4 building projects of the high school, night school, devotion, and the BEEP, proposed BEEP building donation.
One other thing that I would just add is we did talk about the GIC increase, which right now the town is assuming a 2.5% increase, but there was some discussion that may not come to pass. It may be larger than that. However, Mel Kleckner indicated that he was optimistic that if that did increase, there may also be some chance that money from the state could increase to offset that. So they're holding those assumptions for now, but each of them may change.
The town administrator was also asked by members of the advisory committee, I think primarily, but just as a general point of curiosity, to talk about the relation between, on the one hand, his assessment and of the town school partnership and recommend numbers as they were most recently revised, the revenue numbers, and his recommendation that after the split, that an additional $500,000 should be directed toward the school budget to address the enrollment capacity and to reduce demand for override funding, and how that really related to or reconciled with his list of expansion, what he characterizes as expansion investments, which are a bunch of long-standing expansions to various departments, long-standing initiatives that have been tabled because of essentially of the budgetary demands broadly and particularly for the schools. And why was he, if you will, giving away $500,000 to the schools and then asking for this other money on the other side? And he said, well, he sees them as really quite discrete, and that that the list of possible departmental hires and expansions are truly things that are needed in order to best for those departments to function optimally, but they aren't. They're expansions, whereas we're not even going to meet our enrollment growth. The revenue available to schools is not enough to even just maintain our staffing and the necessary hires to deal with the enrollment growth that we're seeing right now. So it was really as being fiscally prudent to make sure that first we could do what we really need to do townwide, and to minimize the impact of the possibility of revenue not changing if there were to be an override and if it were to fail. So that was helpful to hear, because he essentially that answered the question and the recommendation of that $500,000 transfer, which our current numbers are built on. No one objected to it. It seemed that was accepted, I think, and that's a done deal, so that's good. All right, any other questions on the finance update? Yes.
So I just want to clarify in my own mind what we're voting and when. So next Thursday, we are voting only a non-override total budget number and not the detail underneath it. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
And therefore, you're voting the override budget, you're voting a non-override budget, and both with no detail. And you're voting the request of the selectmen of raising funds, additional funds from taxation, which is the delta or the difference between your override and non-override budget. You have to request the selectmen raise money from taxation to meet your budget. These are the 4 votes we reviewed the last meeting we had.
But I guess my confusion is that there are many ways the selectmen can choose to raise revenue. It is not only through,
So the vote is just to raise revenue.
that's not what Ms. Dunn just said. That's why I'm confused.
The language of the vote that we reviewed last time did not include a mention of an override. It just included
Just,
additional revenue.
it just requests additional revenue?
Yes.
But doesn't I guess I'm still confused about that, because doesn't town meeting give us additional revenue, not the selectmen? What are we,
So the selectmen are, they are the body that will put on a ballot any type of vote resulting in taxation. Town meeting, if that vote takes place, town meeting makes the technical appropriation.
okay, I'm gonna let it go. Okay, so when will we, when will we discuss and vote on the detail underneath them? What is our current thinking on the timeline?
So it's a bit dependent upon the selectmen's timeline as
Okay,
well.
okay.
Because we need to get then a, whatever their number is for, what might or might not go on the ballot.
Okay.
And then deliver essentially a new projection or a new budget that will fit to that number. And so what their process is, and Chairman Wyszynski outlined this tonight, they're planning on having a presentation from the Override Study Committee next Tuesday. And then they will have, I believe, David, it was discussion the following week, which is, and then, but they will not have a public hearing until the 27th of February, because they did not want to do that over February vacation week. And then with a plan to make a decision about a number on March 6th, and the deadline is March 13th.
So I guess,
And one piece, they were also looking to schedule the departments, including the school department, that had items on the Override Study Committee's recommendation list, present their budget hearings prior to their hearing on the 27th, so that the selectmen would have the opportunity to hear from the different departments about what their needs were before they had, so they're queuing up early budget meetings and hearings with the impacted departments. So
When are
we've
we
been asked
going?
for either the 20th or the 27th.
so we're gonna,
So that's all being scheduled and finalized based on staff schedules.
so I guess my only question is then, if it's the week of if the superintendent is being asked to go the week of the 20th, that's school vacation week. And if it's the 27th, that's the same night as the public hearing. Is that right? I just want to make sure I'm understanding this calendar.
The public hearing for the high school.
No, forget about the high school.
No,
Yeah,
the public
yeah.
hearing for the
Is the vote for the high school. Well, the public hearing for the override budget.
is the 27th.
But they're going to ask for the superintendent to present on the same night as the public hearing? Okay. Or the week of the 20th, okay.
You're raising a good, we are trying to coordinate it with the select board for just that reason. And we just
Okay.
haven't,
Got it.
Deputy Superintendent Dunn and Deputy Town Administrator Melissa Goff are working to try to finalize this.
Okay.
Because the added challenge is that there is also a school committee meeting docketed for the 27th.
Right.
Following the public hearing.
Right.
And so it is a lot happening
Yeah.
in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And
I got
and how do we get the
Okay.
presentation of the budget to the select board?
Right.
If need be the 20th, I can present it on the 20th. If there's a way to make it work on the 27th, I would then discuss that with the chair to
Okay.
see if that worked within the proposed school committee docket.
Got it. And I guess the only last question I have is, when is it that we think, so for example, are we anticipating, or has there been a discussion with the selectmen as to whether or not they're going to ask us before they vote for a breakdown of what we would do with a different number than the 10.4 number or whatnot, and how is that getting marbled in?
So I certainly hope that they would ask us.
Right.
And we suggested to them that
we
we
advocated to them that
They attended
this
the
afternoon that they
partnership?
needed
Like, to
to do that.
Okay.
That we hoped that
We
they would do
invited
that.
that,
Yes.
Okay, and so when does that happen? Oh, so you don't have to, so I'm getting clear that I'm not going to get into this, but when this is all clear, can somebody send to us just the run of shows so that we understand? Because, I mean, the challenge about voting a 10.4 number next Thursday is that number may or may not tether to anything in reality. It may be the top of a pyramid, it may be the bottom of the pyramid, it may be one number that they put out there, it may be no numbers that they put out there. So I think at some point.
It's the reason that I think the reason that we might be inclined to vote it is that we've worked very hard to develop that, and it represents the work to date.
So
And and that's why we would vote it. This is because we stand behind what we've developed.
Okay.
At that point, what we told Chairman Wyszynski today is that we're not going to slice and dice that until we hear back from them.
Okay.
Like, we're not going to be
So we're
creating
going to vote it and then
hypothetical other
revote.
numbers.
So that's fine. So we're going to vote it, and then if necessary, we will revote something else.
Yes.
Okay.
If the select board comes back with a different number.
But if the select board comes back with a different number, and then so that just leads me to my question is the superintendent? I just want to make sure that we don't end up in a situation, because we've had this in the past. So I'm just playing back my past nightmares for all of you. We've had situations in the past where the select board has asked the superintendent, what would you do with X number? What would you do with Y number? What would you do with Z number? And the superintendent had to say, I need to go back and talk to the school committee. We haven't had that discussion yet, and that was a very frustrating answer for the select board. So I just want to make sure that if we can't create budgets for every single number in the book, and at the same time, I don't want them to get frustrated by needing an answer from the superintendent and or us when we're saying, oh, sorry, we're not going to meet for another 7-10 days. So I just want to I really don't mean to be difficult, but if we don't kind of get the lineup of the timing, it just could put Andrew in a really uncomfortable position. And then, especially if it happens over school vacation week and we're not even meeting till the night of, okay, you get it. Okay, so someone will come solve this, cut the Gordian knot, and figure it out.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Then here's my last question, which is, when are we going to give the public, because I think the public needs to understand the detail underneath potentially the 10.4, when is that going to go out for people so that they can understand it? Or are we not sure yet?
The hope is that both the memo and the connected PowerPoint will be ready for distribution tomorrow.
Okay. And that'll explain both the 10.4 override budget and the non-override budget, what the cuts are.
Yes. The PowerPoint is complete, incorporating feedback both from previous presentations and Finance Subcommittee earlier this week. And the memo is nearly complete in reflecting that same feedback and discussions of the committee, and is in the final stages of being reconciled with the PowerPoint so that that both are in full alignment.
Thank you. Sorry. That's helpful.
All right, so I think that concludes, no, it doesn't conclude our business, but it temporarily concludes our business, and we have a need of an executive session. So I move that the school committee meet in executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, for purpose 2, to conduct a strategy session in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, specifically the Deputy Superintendent for School and School Business for Administration and Finance, or School and School Business Administrator, and for purpose 7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant and aid requirement, parentheses, approval of executive session minutes. Would you please poll the board?
Yes.
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 The committee will now meet in executive session pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, for purpose 2, to conduct a strategy session in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, specifically the Deputy Superintendent of Schools, School Business Administrator, and for apparently I'm supposed to say it again, and for purpose 7, to comply with just following directions. or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant and aid requirements, approval of executive session minutes. The committee, I didn't say this before, the committee will be returning to open session. So we will come back here. We're going to go down the hall for this meeting. Thank you all.